I'd like to introduce you to a fascinating sport. This is a sport that traces its roots right back to 4500 BC, where the sole purpose is to see who can reach the greatest depth in the ocean on a single breath of air. Freediving is a sport that can strike fear in the athletes, and it's not just the sort of fear you get worrying about being injured running onto a football field, but something far more primal. By primal, I mean those powerful alarm systems that have been with us since birth that warn us when danger is near. Like, for example, if you've ever crept up to the edge of a really tall cliff. Primal fear is what gives us that welling up in our stomach, that knot that's created that just, drags us back to somewhere safe. Well, freediving combines two primal fears at the same time. On the one hand, you've got this fear of suffocation, of not being able to draw breath no matter how desperate you are for air. And it combines it with sinking in the open ocean, where at the surface you're swimming in nice light blue, then it goes to dark blue, and then it goes to pitch black. And you might still have another minute to sink. I first found out about this sport when I was living in a village in the south of France. And I was there working as a sports psychologist for a motorcycle racing team, MotoGP. And up to that point, I'd worked with athletes who had done some really dangerous stuff. I'd worked with big wave tow-in surfers, base jumpers, mountaineers, guys that risk life and limb in the pursuit of their sport. Yet there I was. I'd never done anything remotely dangerous. And here I was teaching them how to jump off taller cliffs or, race faster around a racing track. I felt like a fraud. I'd never succeeded even in a regular sport, let alone a dangerous sport. Everything I was teaching them came out of a textbook. And part of me really wanted to know, could I take risks like that? Could I be as confident and as relaxed before doing something truly terrifying? So I looked around, and two sports caught my eye. The first was bullfighting, and the other one was freediving. So I went with the lesser of the two evils here, and I chose freediving. Now, in the village where I was living, there were, there was a small freediving club, and in that club there were guys who could hold their breath for over 6 minutes. Now, it's difficult to explain what it's like to hold your breath that long, but needless to say, it's incredibly uncomfortable. I liken it to doing anything that denies your body of something that it requires to sustain life. Like, for example, if you were to go without food. How long do you think you'd go without eating? 27 days, give or take. That's how long you'd last. What about without sleep? Some of you might have tried this. 10 days, and then you die. But these are enormous times. 27 days without food, 10 days without sleep. The psychology of human survival is fascinating. Although we're capable of lasting these very long times, after a very short amount of time, we start to experience the discomfort and the panic that comes with that, and we withdraw from our challenge. Well, freediving is the same. In freediving, you get so much discomfort after a short amount of time that even though you're capable of holding your breath for most of us, quite a long time, we panic and we stop. Over the years of training and competing, I put up with a lot of discomfort, and it was interesting because other athletes started to ask me, so Ant, what have you learned? What have you learned about managing fear? I've got quite a cool model I want to share with you today. It comes from Grovian psychology to try to explain what it is that I do. I want you to imagine that your life is like a movie. And as you're traveling through life, there are all these discrete frames of this movie that make up your life. And then at some point in time, you come to time. Time is a moment where you're undertaking a challenge or doing something that genuinely scares you. But rather than focusing on time, think of those moments before time. Time minus 1, time minus 2, time minus 3, and so on. Time minus one is that moment where you most want to give up. It's that moment where you feel overwhelmed, where you feel highly anxious, and you're kind of freaking out, and you want to just find a way to back out of your challenge. We all have these challenges in life. I know in my sport, I have my unfair share. I have been circled by tiger sharks off the coast of Hawaii. I have been pinned to the bottom of a pitch black lake in New Zealand, caught by faulty equipment. But what I've learned is it's actually not these really big fears that hold us back, but it's these small fears that really get us. Fears like ending a difficult relationship, delivering some painful news to a loved one, getting up on stage and delivering a TED speech. Time minus one is just a fleeting moment in time, but how you deal with that moment will ultimately determine how successful you'll be in your challenge. The world's best freedivers, they all do the same thing. They don't focus on the dive, they focus on the moment before the dive. And in that moment, they focus on their breathing and on their relaxation and on the absolute conviction that they're going to be able to go through with their dive. My ultimate time minus one challenge came at a recent World Cup event. The deepest I'd ever been in competition was 82 meters. And here I'd announced an attempt at 100. It's the pinnacle of freediving. Only a handful of divers in the world have ever attempted it. The location was a spot called Dean's Blue Hole in the Bahamas. It's this deep underwater cave shaped by nature over millions of years that drops away 200 meters straight off the beach. My training had been going pretty good up to the final day, but when that day arrived, the sky was dark and the blue hole had a really menacing feel about it. The diver before me was a friend of mine, and I watched him come up to the surface and collapse, like a really significant blackout. He was spewing blood from his lungs, and the medics were trying to recover him and resuscitate him. I pulled myself up onto the floating platform you can see in the picture. I just tried to regain my composure, but the gravity of what I had just witnessed and what lay ahead from me was inescapable. They called me over to the dive line. But my mindset was not what you might expect. Rather than fear, rather than anxiety, I lay on my back and I felt nothing but complete relaxation and actually happiness. I felt in a state of bliss. I lay on my back. I slowed my breathing and I listened to the 2-minute countdown to 0. On 0, I filled an enormous amount of air in my lungs. I packed it in, and then I rolled over and I began my descent. Now, by 5 meters, just to get down to 5 or 10 meters, you have to swim really hard to overcome that buoyancy of this massive amount of air, 10 liters of air that you put in your lungs. But then by the time you get down to 20 meters, now the weight of the water above you is so heavy that it'll actually push you down. You just sink. So I just pulled my arms down by my side, shut my eyes, and just drifted off. By 50 meters, I was surrounded by pitch black darkness. My lungs had shrunk to about the size of a grapefruit, and you're all alone. One of the most solitary things you can do on this planet is sink alone in the open ocean. The fear, the brutal discomfort. As I approached 100 meters, the pressure on my chest was causing, it actually felt like someone was ramming a pétanque ball through my chest. It felt like someone had come up behind me and was giving me a big bear hug, and simultaneously, someone else was just grabbing my throat. Apparently, I found out later that my trachea had actually collapsed under the pressure. That's a life-scale diagram of me at 100 meters. When I got there, I reached out for the bottom plate, and my mind was screaming for me to do it fast. I turned around and I started swimming really hard to get off the bottom, right? Because there's so much weight of water above you. It was going well, and I'd been swimming, and then after 3 minutes of swimming, it was still pitch black. And my mind said to me, something's wrong. I'm stuck. I'm still at the bottom. I carried on swimming, harder than ever. And finally, I made it back to the surface. And when I did, I was overwhelmed with a sense of accomplishment. In that moment, it defined who I was and what I was capable of achieving in this world. For about a month later, I woke every morning with a big stupid grin on my face. I've learned that risk takers do something different to the rest of us. They learn how to manage their fear, and in the process, they build confidence, conviction, a belief in their ability to handle whatever it is that might come their way. To achieve something great in life, you have to be prepared to take positive, calculated risk. It's not always easy. In fact, normally it's really hard. It's uncomfortable, but anyone can learn how to do it. When it comes to your dreams, what are you prepared to risk in order to make them a reality? We're living in a very risk-averse society. Playgrounds, at schools and in parks, have rubber cushion surfaces so that our kids won't scrape their knees. Helmets are mandatory to ride the tiniest of scooters. In an organized sport, we no longer even keep score because we're too afraid that a child might experience failure. But it's through this failure that they learn how to cope. In business, risk-averse managers stifle creativity. They block innovation. They resist the very change that organizations need to adapt and to survive. Strong leadership is not about following rules or playing it safe. It's about inspiring others towards a vision for something that's truly worth a struggle. So where do you need to be more courageous in life? Life might feel safer when you're in control, but every time you take a risk, you learn something new about yourself. It's a fantastic form of self-discovery. It builds resilience. It boosts your self-confidence. It helps you redefine your limits and break free from the average way of thinking. So set your goals high and keep your setbacks in perspective. And remember, what you do before your challenge has a massive impact on how you undertake your challenge. Bravery begins with belief. It begins with your belief that you have the ability to handle whatever comes your way. Thanks.